Oh. Yes.
Hey, this is Jupiter Exile, and today we're doing real YouTuber stuff. I'm usually scripted, but today's just gonna be off the cuff. We are reacting to a Bayonetta 3 fix video proposed by TokenCast. If you've seen my other content on Bayonetta 3, you'll know I think there's quite a lot to fix, both mechanically and with the story especially. I think the story is a little more egregious than what I see as some of the mechanical flaws. I think mechanically, you can probably just clean the level ups and the camera, and it'll be okay. Story-wise, it's all over the place. There's a full cutting room floor guaranteed between where the game is, where it needs to be, and maybe some stuff in between. So let's see what TokenCast has to say about it, and we'll pause along the way and offer some input. Audio good? Maybe a little loud on that end. So
It goes without saying that beating a dead horse involving a certain Bayonetta 3 and the entirety of the fucking plot is
it's
not
got a bit of my
necessarily
gameplay in here,
stale, but it's become a meme at this point. So, in an effort to, I don't know, be constructive or utilize and capitalize on this random growth burst I've had that I don't even fucking understand fully myself.
TokenCast picked up.
Because I'm pretty sure that I only speak English, technically partially French, but for some reason there's a lot of people from different places all automatically just finding my stuff now. I don't know what I did, but I'm not gonna complain about it, you know? So let me be positive or try to be constructive when I criticize. In the case of Bayonetta 3. Now, I'm sure you've seen videos like Exile as well as many other people on social media and of course YouTube who went out of their way to basically state why there's a problem. Johto, Johnny, and Exile did the best jobs as far as I'm concerned. So I won't bore you too much with that.
Enemy
Instead,
design,
I'm going to go down the complaint
plot elements
list,
that
the
just
gripe
don't stick
list,
together.
and I'm going to try to fix them. Essentially, this is a what if Bayonetta 3 director's cut type of video. And I think it's the only one of its type. So, holy shit, I did something Raccoon hasn't done. That's
I was thinking about putting together
again.
something like this, but it's
First and foremost,
there's
let's
so
start
much
off
to
with the
talk about.
weaponry.
It's a lot.
Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying the weapons in Bayonetta 3 are terrible or don't live up to hype/expectations.
I think some of them are really bad. I called out G-Pillar twice
in my nature
in my
to
vid.
compare everything to Sci-Fung, but in this one instance, I'm not going to do that. So, the biggest thing I would fix with the weapons
We're missing a lot of pretty cool
how
options.
you receive them.
Some of the stuff
And
was
on
really
top
good.
of how you receive them, the fact that a previous Bayonetta utilizes them first.
Yeah.
Not really a fan of that. That entire approach should be completely different. Essentially what I would do is have designated enemies in every single area, or rather stage, hold a piece of a fragment. We'll say up to mission 10. Some of the enemies are hidden.
So that's really going back to older systems where you'd have to look around a level, or you get some of them at the end of a verse. And what he's saying, what he went through very briefly of just saying you don't want to get these as a hand-me-down from another Bayonetta. Knowing that you'll get the weapon and making it feel matter of course makes it feel kind of tiring and less cool, especially when you're getting like the third and fourth weapon down the line. It stops being a unique experience or something you've had to earn. If you got part of a weapon from one of the Bayonettas, but then you had to run around and do some more stuff, or you had to get like a sufficient clear quality on her level and her bosses, I think that would be cool.
Some of them are boss related. Some of them have more than one piece.
Legit.
And as long as you find them and beat them, you get that fragment of the LP and you send it back to Rodin. That's how it should be done. Because that means that I actually have to work for it. That adds a level of replayability. Yes, a lot of people can cheat the system and just go look it up on the strategy guide. You have to look at this as if someone's playing the game essentially naked. Also, secondary unlockable weapons via difficulty modes and secret mission. 3.
Now, I think the game has some of those. I know you get at least 2 weapons for beating the game on first clear. I don't know how many more you get if you keep at it.
Match the weapons that are on your feet versus on your hands.
I didn't play the game much past the first playthrough. I wasn't enjoying myself a bunch.
There are some weapons that can only be with hands, some that
the original game I played through like 4 or 5 times, but 3 I wasn't feeling it.
But they still ended up going back to that system of occasionally making weapons that can only be utilized on your feet and never on your hands.
That
I'm
was an
okay with
interesting
that.
change up for
Also,
Bayonetta 3,
the
and I
whole
see
Bayonetta's
why they
dying
did that
to
with
get
how
your weapon,
kind of,
nah. I would rather
frankly,
you can get their
over-designed the
second
weapons
weapon
are.
in a special cutscene
And I could
that
either
triggers
take it or leave it either way.
once you beat the boss of the area where you meet them, if you've already got your Dimensions version of that weapon. Now for the next playable character, Viola. Let's bounce.
There's a lot going on with Viola. Oh, this is cutting over all of a sudden. People mad about Viola for real.
Balance that out a little bit.
I'm not really mad about
First and
Viola
foremost, that
being
giant
around.
tank
She needs
missile
work though.
launching thing, ridiculous weapon that Bayonetta just gets handed to her by Rodin. Yeah, fuck that. Give it to Viola. So that way she has a long range and a close range weapon. And of the close range weapons and long range weapons, for most people I know, that ugly little bastard was one of the first things to never get used and be put in the
I tried using G
proverbial,
Pillar
"This is
for
the
maybe
thing I'm
2
never really gonna
encounters,
care
and I
about,
set
so
it down.
let's let
It's
it
not a
collect dust."
satisfying weapon.
Weapons that are common in Devil May Cry.
It doesn't make good
and
use of the
Bayonetta
shootout
series.
mechanic, in my opinion.
Everybody's
It just
got
makes
one.
it feel very clunky. I said this in my video anyway.
Well, I've got like 3, but it's a little bit too embarrassing to talk about. I would also potentially like to give her
Full
the
Shader as a
option
whip.
later on
I
in
think
the
you get a
game,
whip in the
or
very late game as
after
an
beating
optional
the
weapon
original
for the
difficulty
Kraken stuff.
of allowing Viola to utilize Bayonetta's weapons. However, she obviously controls them different, or she blends them with the sword. But this would be something that is given to you as a reward for completing hard mode.
So it's an interesting thought. So Viola's locked to her sword the entire time. The sword moveset, I think, is kind of mediocre. A lot of the stuff with the sword, you have the charge inputs after your attacks, but because you don't get any feedback until you release the charge, there's nothing along the way. Unlike, Bayonetta's standard with a gun, you go into a shootout and you start immediately getting damage and hit stun as soon as you're holding the button. I didn't enjoy that very much, and I found that properly executing Viola, you were just leaning on command inputs the whole time. Meh. But I actually think the bigger problem with Viola's moveset, which would be fixed by this, is her darts don't feel like they have a lot of impact. You throw out darts, and it feels like it just dinks into enemies. There's not a good hit sound based on them. They don't have a lot of impact just from the way the animations are playing out. And they're not mechanically reinforced either. You could have done something there where you fill an enemy up with darts and then slash them with the sword to cause an explosion or something like that. You could have put that in your skill tree. It's missing. So you just fling around a bunch of darts, and they actually feel like they have less impact than the bullets fired out by Color My World, which are fired out very passively, kind of all the time, but they have this constant rattling sound as you're going through them, and that just makes a world of difference. So you might be able to fix that stuff by giving Viola some other weapons. Now, Bayonetta has the weird place of her weapons are related to her demons, and it's got the demon masquerade forms that they didn't do for Viola. I'm not married to the demon masquerade idea at all. It just kind of shows up in the game out of nowhere. Bayonetta's never done that before, so I don't think that's a big deal if you cut it. I think there's supposed to be a story implication on Viola in terms of having the sword and Cheshire being tied into the sword. Cheshire's not handled with the demon slave. He just does his own thing independently. Pretty sure it's a he. I don't know, whatever. So I think you could have a setup where Viola gets a sub-weapon that's related to the demons that is maybe just a ranged weapon, and she's always using the sword and ranged weapons, or always using the sword and a sub-weapon. So maybe you could get a fist weapon, throw out the sword, and then her fist attacks might start to feel good, because they also feel like they have an impact problem and just a satisfaction issue. Or you can give her something to replace her darts. Give her a laser pistol or a flamethrower when you're using a Gamora-based weapon or something like that. But broadening her weapon set might have fixed some just general feedback issues that I felt were a secondary problem with Viola.
I would also like to give her certain accessories that, alter her blocking ability. If I can give her the ability to guard,
they went back and
Bayonetta
kind of
style
hit this with a patch.
and
They
use that
needed
button
to
for
make
something else, or
Viola's
maybe a
parry
secondary or an EX
better.
move, I'm all for it.
Biggest
Generally
problem with
speaking,
Viola's
Viola should have
parry
had her
is
own
that
weapon list.
some of the enemies in the
Also,
game aren't
because,
really
I'm
designed
gonna bring it
around
Give her
a
ass Scythe.
standing
If you're not
still
gonna give it to
defense.
Bayonetta no more, let the new
The
girl
dodge is
try
a
it out.
moving
Give
defense,
her
so
Scythe.
enemies that were the P
four
hat
weapons,
spinny
You ain't
things,
killing nobody. You ain't hurt nobody.
you need
with
to
that.
dodge
Now for the
through
skills.
them
The skills weren't a
for that
bad
to work.
idea. I like where they were trying to go with them. They essentially made them more exotic than they did in Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2. And that's a good idea. They added more without adding too much. That's the way I look at it when it comes to the skills. But here's where it becomes too much. Why do I have to unlock the same skills on different weapons 6-7 times over?
Yeah.
That is not hyperbole or
I think for what the weapon, I think for what the skills were, it didn't feel good enough to unlock them again and again and again.
There, what makes you think I'm gonna like it here? You silly bitch. Look, you had the right idea, but if you want to increase longevity of play, get people to try to build up bigger scores, use those points.
This might be my gameplay. I spent a lot of time around here. I don't remember.
And the summon mode of each weapon. Let those stay. But once I unlock my dashing move, my lunging move, my aerial, my launchers, all those essential basics, the shooting ones, they should just be on every weapon unless it doesn't have a shooting function. And then let me do the same thing for Viola. And I guess
this is something
John,
I wanted to comment on elsewhere, maybe like a really short video. But in a brawler, having a gap closer is essential.
Also,
that's referred to as, I refer to it as the stinger, because that's what the gap closer move is called in DMC, and DMC is the original. If you unlock a new weapon and it doesn't have a stinger like locked and ready to go, it's useless.
Let's do that system.
And having to unlock extra stuff before a weapon is viable sucks.
We all know Viola.
So if you're going to keep a skill around, have the stinger on every weapon default unlocked.
Once we got to know her. And we all know Jeanne was basically an afterthought. I literally feel like when they were writing the story, they saw somebody say, I wonder what Jeanne's going to do in this game, when they were already doing production. And were like, holy shit, we forgot about Jeanne. Isn't that Kamiya's favorite character?
Yeah, she's like barely in
let's
here.
Make her do minigame shit. Yeah, that's a smart idea. No, sweetie. No. Everything that Jeanne did, Viola could have done.
All right, I got to hold here for a little bit because as much as they gave Jeanne a minigame, and that's almost the only thing she gets to do, I love that little elevator action minigame, man. It was actually like, it was a fun bit of difference. It used mostly the same kind of controls that you're normally using, and it was just fun. They made it super campy. I really liked the little QTJ transformations and blasting away some of the basic dudes and playing with stealth, which is not a thing in the rest of Bayonetta. So it was just a really, I really enjoyed that kind of variance in the gameplay. I would also like to play Jeanne in some bits in the normal gameplay, and I think she's very underutilized in the story. But I like what she did, and I don't think it would fit Viola because Viola's not like a secret agent type of character. She's too clumsy for it.
They got to keep the comical aspect of Viola trying to look cool and being a total klutz. I wouldn't have had a problem with it. They didn't make me any hard promises with Jeanne. They never do. I usually make assumptions, and I usually get screwed, but there's usually a silver lining. Not in this case. Example, Bayonetta 1, palette swap, you can play Jeanne.
Probably isn't me, because I never did that with
weapons
the
even come out looking different.
This is not
different
my
summon
gameplay.
demons. Bayonetta 2, you can play Jeanne. She has her own lines, all that jazz. She replaces Bayonetta in the cutscenes where Bayonetta would be, so essentially you can see two Jeannes on screen at once. I thought that once you rescue Jeanne, I would be able to fight with stages of Bayonetta in hell and Jeanne's body back up in the real world, helping with the stabilization from that location. It just makes sense.
I think that's more legitimate than what you have with the Bayonetta and Viola levels. The Viola levels really hurt to play.
And they didn't bullshit us by
3.
giving us 3 or 4 different Jeanne fights or any boss fights habitually over and over again, where they pretty much did the same thing but with one slight alteration. Yes, I know Lopter technically shows up, but hey, look, those were completely different types of fights every single time he showed up, and they properly escalated a lot better than the stuff with Jeanne. Fun fact, before the game came out, I used to always call her Jeanne. It just feels more feminine than Jeanne. Viola.
It's a typical Japanese spelling. It's how they would refer to like Joan of Arc. Would be Jeanne.
Have Jeanne maybe do
Jeanne's
4
the right
stages.
spelling.
Bayonetta do the rest,
pronunciation.
and they combine on 2 or 3 stages nearing the end of the game. One person has to take out, well, the main bad guy, and the other one has to stop crazy.
One thing I really miss that you don't get to capitalize on in Bayonetta 3, in Bayonetta 2, there were scenes where you palled around with Rosa, and you got to do team torture attacks, where like Bayonetta's summoning the rack, and Rosa like hops up on there to strut. That was incredible.
Luca is just Luca. He's not the love of Bayonetta's life. Bayonetta, on a bad day, bisexual. But if she is, it's because her designers are essentially perverts.
You can put
but
Luca out of there.
Until otherwise confirmed, is heterosexual. I wouldn't care if she fell in love with Rodin. By the way, that child they would have would be disturbingly scary and powerful. I don't want to think about it. That's essentially it when it comes to that. John's presence was sorely missed.
Yeah, Zach's here
There
who's
should have been
speaking
places
as
and
absolute
times where
fan
there
of
could have been
Rodin.
co-op
He's not
options
wrong.
where you can both be on screen at once. I don't care if it's just an AI or maybe, a mini game mode like in Bayonetta 2. Yes, I still miss it. I love the co-op. I would have preferred that. But no, we didn't get
So
that.
weird
And
there was
Viola can
co-op
go
in
look for that
Bayonetta 2.
guy. She can even be the one that gets stabbed in the back.
Lose that
literally.
feature. All right.
She earned it. Wow, don't you think you're being a little bit too harsh on Viola's ex? No, I don't. God of destructions feared not destruction itself. We make it. Actually, the part that'll take the longest, but I spent about a week compressing it so I can avoid it taking the longest. The god-awful story. First and foremost, even the world of video games is not immune to a 3rd-act structure or 3-act structure. However, we have a little bit more leeway. We can do a 4-act and get away with it.
Okay, yeah, this is the part where stuff gets really complex. There's a lot of problems with the story.
Don't change the opening.
In general,
that whole entire from beginning to first stage.
The way the villain is introduced, some of the side plots, the characters get very little place to develop because they don't spend much time with each other.
Professor Singularity, because he's both a good guy and a bad guy, but Professor Singularity just seems like accurate. But Viola, being a klutz as she is, accidentally triggers an alarm, whether it's silent or out loud, and because of this, he essentially puts up a bunch of defenses, not knowing that Viola is there as an ally and potentially to help them. Up until this point, we don't know how far along they are in the interdimensional travel portion of this adventure. While that's going on, John goes to Chai-Netta's world, and Bayonetta goes to Shinjuku Netta's world. Now, some of the same beats do happen. They do die.
This is something they could have worked up or could have played with some more. You have only Bayonetta traveling from world to world. Well, you've got Bayonetta and Viola, but Bayonetta and Viola are always in the same world at the same time. There's no juxtaposition of where they're actually located or what's going on. So you could have them both go to the same world initially. They could split off. You could have a segment where Viola is going through one world that Bayonetta is going to go to later, and that's building up anticipation. You could have a world that only Viola goes to, and maybe you don't play proper alpha Bayonetta in that area. You only play the Bayonetta that's unique to that world, where you have these other interactions going on. The problem with the story as it exists, it's just very formulaic and it becomes very repetitive. They needed to do anything, all costs, to just vary it up.
But what happens is you only get a fragment of the weapon. It's been broken and busted to pieces.
Yeah, this was talked about earlier.
We'll just say the bigger homunculus did it. So that way, counts as a decent boss fight, or maybe a secret boss and mini boss fights. However, you both bring back fragments to Rodin. The fragments you brought back are mystically enchanted by Rodin to now have the ability to detect pieces of itself throughout the dimensions. This is when Rodin reveals that there's only one of himself, but he needs their help as much as they need his help.
Okay, so we're going to get a very Rodin central version of the story.
Rodin is not invest into the actual combat and the stages, because Rodin has to stop those weapons from interdimensionally dematerializing, because not only does he want to work on them for himself, he wants to help Bayonetta and John get this stuff straight so they could potentially use those weapons to help out in the ongoing fights. So now we have a canonical reason why Rodin is not assisting. Also, this helps
So that's a big one. A canonical reason why Rodin isn't doing anything, because we get the mention at the beginning of the game that Rodin, we get the mention from Rodin at the beginning of the game that Inferno and Paradiso have a stake in this, that there's a reason for them to not want Sigurd's Singularity to succeed in what they're doing, because they're going to overwrite the Trinity of Realities and do this whole thing. But they don't really take time to explain why Inferno and Paradiso are not attacking homunculi. And we don't get to see, basically through the entire game, any of the angels or the demons fighting the homunculi, despite it being said that they have stakes to do that. We've got a segment in Bayonetta 2 where Rodin shows up and is there in person crunching demons so you could get on over to Jeanne. But we just don't have his character utilized in this game pretty much at all. He's just hanging out back at the bar. I think there's something in the logs about the Singularity blocking the ability of those groups to come in and engage. And either way, the homunculi aren't in Purgatorio or anything like that, so maybe they can't interact. But we go to the various portals that open up and create little challenge areas where you fight those guys. It's understood that those are like the incursion points where the demons and the angels are both trying to punch through. But there's never any point where they actually punch through. Rodin doesn't do anything. We don't have other demons showing up to do things except for the demons that work directly with Bayonetta through the demon slave and that whole contracting. We've barely even got other witches showing up to do stuff, from what I can recall. I guess it's been a couple months by now, but yeah.
The people who do not have access
Canonical
to the internet
reason
necessarily. So
for
they can
Rodin to
go
do nothing
play
if
as
he's
one of
going to
the
do
characters
nothing.
in any of those stages that they're on, and they can go around the stage and see if there's a vibration system or an on-screen indicator beacon going on.
Well, I understand you can
letting
unlock
them know,
Rodin
hey,
as
oh,
a
snap,
summon
guess what?
if you
might
like,
find
do
another
all the
piece of a
crazy
weapon.
extra stuff.
But because the game is the game, it doesn't just detect
He's the ultimate
weapon pieces that
unlockable
it
in this
goes
game.
to, it can also detect weapon pieces that go to a weapon that the other character might be using. So essentially, Bayonetta is using a set amount of weapons, and Jeanne is using a set amount of weapons. So we stop the overlap on the weapon wheel immediately. Eventually, you
I
get
could
a
go
complete
either way on
weapon.
that.
Rodin says he can now make current dimension version of the weapon. So now you got the choice of your loadouts. Bayonetta can have her weapon, foot in hand, or you can choose to let Jeanne utilize one until Rodin can quote unquote.
So
get
if this
enough
means that you
halos
would have
make a
to
dimensional
unlock the
duplicate.
weapons multiple
So,
times, I could see
you
that being
still get
kind
the
of
head and
annoying.
foot
So
option,
I could
but
take
like
it or
last
leave it.
time, you got to work for it if you want both characters to be able to do it. And because, you know, John's motifs coloring is always different. The alternate dimension duplicate or current dimension duplicate coloration and those versions are exclusive to Jeanne. So that way, boom, we've also increased the replayability because now you got to use all of your
Fair.
item material to potentially make this stuff. And I like that. Now on to the Viola section of Viola's
go either way
missions,
with
as mentioned, are different. I feel in her missions, she should be partially aided by Enzo and Luca. Enzo can be a distraction to help get in the buildings.
It would be good if
Or
she's going to be
Enzo can
Luca's
be a
daughter. She
temporary
should
item
interact
or
with him
assist
more
call
during the
out.
game.
And you can utilize him.
As for
to
Enzo,
make sure
I
your
like the
alert value
gag that
doesn't
Enzo
dramatically
only ever
increase
shows up at
if
the
you screw
beginning
up.
and the end of a
But
game,
you have
and
a
the
limited amount of
extra
times of using
Inspector
because
Enzo
if you
gag
use
we
him too
got
much,
was
they
really
quote-unquote
good.
arrest
So,
him, and they try to send him to
but
go get converted.
Luca running around with
into
Viola is a really good idea.
homunculus. And you have to make sure that doesn't happen or you get a game over. Luca, on the other hand, if you meet up with him or you find special Luca notes throughout the stage, Luca helps you
Typical
get a
war
map
stuff.
layout of the area, tells you where certain hidden items and secrets are, and he can even be used to help find fragments to weapons that go to Bayonetta's and Jeanne's.
So this kind of relates to some stuff you can kind of tell while you're playing with the game is basically cut material. You run around the hub world of the basic island, and you can basically tell that it's intended to be kind of this open world space. It is sprawling compared to any other location we've seen in Bayonetta, which leads you to believe that maybe when they were originally figuring out the game, they had a concept where it was more of an open world thing. Maybe you could go in various directions, pick your poison about, you know, what to do in what order. And if you're going that direction, adding a mini map, adding, you know, extra mechanics to help players discover all the secrets is really good, and Luca's a good thematic fit for that. It looks like they cut back on that either way, but if they were, you know, going the whole 9 yards, it would be a good idea to keep that in.
You never even met, or they can go to other Violas that are only spoken about, never seen in the game. Her first weapon being a Nodachi. And no, she doesn't dual wield. But the Nodachi has the ability to send out water waves. You swing it enough times and there's enemies in the area,
That's
they
fun.
get pushed back by a tidal wave.
We've had plenty
or
of
they can
weapons
slip and
with
fall,
like
put them in a
elemental
temporary
style
stun state,
effects.
so you can better focus on one
So
enemy.
fine to do something like that.
However, you know, the bigger and heavier the enemy, the less that's going to work. Really cool. Really fucking cool. Let's say we get to about the halfway point of the game. At this point, Singularity is essentially letting you know, oh, I'm gonna
pause here before he goes on to the next thing. But basically, part of the problem with Viola's kit is that she's like very low personality because she only has the one weapon loadout. You do not get a lot of expression in the way that you handle Viola. And having other weapons that Viola can equip that gave her a different feel or a different aesthetic would really help along with that. It's a big part of all of the stuff that, when combined, makes Viola feel like she is a sideline character. And it's the fact that she feels so hard sidelined in this game that makes it very weird when at the end of the game you're told she's the successor to the franchise. Comparing Nero in Devil May Cry 4, you play him through half the game, and you play him a lot in Devil May Cry 5, I presume, which I still haven't taken the time to sit down and play DMC5. That's probably like a big to-do list item. But if in Devil May Cry 4 they had done a formal sign-off at the end of the game to say Nero's the guy now, I'd be fully on board with that, because we spend so much time in Nero's shoes and enjoying his playset, his kit. Even though for most of the game he just has one weapon, he just uses just one sword, one gun. But they have interesting mechanics. Like the Red Queen is like a chain sword you can rev up. He has a charging pistol, which is different from Dante's pistol a little bit. It's not very good. And he has the Devil Bringer, which is one of the best innovations in 3D brawlers in the last long goddamn time. His kit doesn't feel stale. Viola's really goddamn boring.
Take out all the Bayonettas, specifically you. Now, nobody knows why. Rodin has a theory, but no one
Okay, so we're getting into the motives of the villain.
Except for Luca. But
Luca is the lore guy,
dial in,
to be
he's
fair.
found out why. They hear a lot of loud noises and whatnot going on, and they go try to find Luca because Enzo knew where his last location was. Viola's still going to do her second mission, so she's still out of this bitch. So it's Enzo chauffeuring, and everybody else in the back seat.
It's a regular kickoff.
Site, let's call it.
That's how you start any Bayonetta.
We'll say you're at Paris now, so you get to Paris a lot earlier. I kind of like that stage. And you see that
Paris
there's
was
a
a
wolf
good stage.
rampaging, beating the crap out
Paris
of
had
everything,
unique
and there's an unconscious
bits
Luca
that made it
with
feel better.
holes in his body, slash marks. Now, you choose who's going to fight that boss. So you choose either Jeanne or Bayonetta, and the other person is trying to use their magic abilities to keep him alive long enough to open up a new portal.
You only need to give
for
the
Rodin.
player that
'Cause we don't
choice
actually
if it's
know
going to be
what
important.
the process is for opening Rodin's portals when it's not Rodin coming through them. So Rodin's working on a chant to get him over there, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, halfway through the fight, boom, that Luca turns into a wolf. So now we're fighting blue Luca wolf and red Luca wolf.
I mean, they called it
But
Strider for
Blue
various
Luca
reasons, but they couldn't emphasize that it was Luca. That had to be a hidden element. So we've got
Essentially
two
can talk.
wolves. There are two wolves inside Luca.
And you got to get him to calm down or you beat him. And depending on which option you choose, that'll have different alterations to the story, but not by a dramatic amount. So, after this stage is over, everyone returns. Luca's unconscious. Rodin decides to keep him in a special chain imprisonment. He's going to try figuring out what's going on with him once he's more conscious. Enzo's going to stick around too, because now he's mad and sad that not only did he lose his wife and his daughter and kids, but he also lost his car because the wolves fucked up the car.
Well, yeah, if you've got Enzo in the scene, somebody's got to destroy his car. That's just the basics of how Enzo works. So I think that if you have the idea of like splitting Luca up into two wolves, you've got like a good thing and a bad thing to fight. That's okay. But if you see Luca turn into a wolf on screen, we're ditching the mystery aspect of it. And the mystery aspect of who's the wolf is maybe one of the only things that gives this like Luca wolf side plot thing any real merit. So Luca turning into a wolf, I think, is a plot point you can almost entirely ditch. If you want to keep Luca turning into a wolf here, then you still want to off-screen him turning into a wolf, I think. You want to have the wolf show up first, but we need to find out what's going on in a way that is more gradual, in a way that is not suddenly Viola sees Luca turning into a wolf. We need to know what the Fae are, what they do, why they're different, and why that matters. So you can show off the wolf at most once, and then you need to explain to us who the Fae are. And you can't explain to us who the Fae are through a Fae that is like this weird, fully developed Luca. You need to show us like a Fae society or like a real something going on. The way it's displayed in the game is just, there's so little attention paid to it that the whole arc of it feels very arbitrary. Luca's a wolf. Luca has like Fae ancestry. We don't really get a a big implication out of that. So what does it matter that he has a Fae ancestry? Like, what are the Fae? We're not going to look at that, but he's a wolf now. Whatever.
So y'all go back to what y'all doing.
So this
Dimensional
suggestion
hopping, all that jazz
doesn't fix all the problems.
You go back to the one place we all thought we were always going to go. You go back to a dimension that is having the Vigrid war between the Lumen Sages and the Umbran Witches.
That's legit.
And both Jeanne and Bayo potentially experience PTSD. Bayonetta, wanting to stay on mission, doesn't want to interfere. But Jeanne does want to interfere. So in this particular stage you're playing as Jeanne, you're not coming back to Bayonetta till the end or till the boss fight.
So if you're already jumping across universes, you might as well jump through time. We've jumped through time in every other game. We've done a Vigrid flashback in both of the 2 other games, and they've always been fantastic set pieces. It's core to the lore. It makes infinitely more sense to retcon something into the Vigrid war that eventually winds up inspiring the current conflict than it does to actually move on to another topic. Bayonetta never moves on from other topics. We're always retconning new stuff into like the flashbacks and the way back when. Just keep doing it. It's fine. That is the kind of repetitive story flubbing that we will forgive forever. Just keep putting us back in Vigrid, make that war as cool as you want, revisit the occurrences of it, redo the occurrences of it, make something different happen. Maybe we save Rosa. Maybe we, like, prevent Baldur from being possessed. Maybe there's a world where Rosa gets possessed instead of Baldur, and Rosa goes on to be the villain of Bayonetta 1 in that world, and then we're tooling around with Baldur. Perfectly fine character to roll with.
Jeanne watches Rosa die. Jeanne gets the Tonfa weapon from Rosa. Now, she's even more angry because she's remembering how many people she lost. We're having flashbacks to how she grew up. Because remember, Jeanne grew up completely.
That's actually something that's very missing in the game. Is
she was royalty, and
our characterization for Jeanne is ultimately pretty thin across all 3 games. You'd think that since she is like on the deathbed in 2, we could have spent more time in 2 talking about Jeanne and her past.
But again, depending on if you spare that wolf or kill that wolf, different things happen. You kill the wolf, you get a wolf-based weapon. You give it to Viola. You spare the wolf. Well, we'll save that for the end. Now, speed forward to the last 3 stages.
Okay, I don't care to give the player choice over outcomes in this genre of game. And as a player, I don't want to deal with worrying about like ending selection when I'm playing Bayonetta. I just want to play it through. So I'm pretty mid on that idea.
You realize that Viola's been killed, and you realize that, oh shit, we sent her to find somebody who already knew.
I missed something. I talked over him. Oops, that's my bad. Is Viola getting killed? What's happening?
Jeanne watches Rosa die.
Okay, caught this.
Jeanne gets the Tonfa weapon from Rosa.
Yep.
Now she's even more angry because she's remembering how many people she lost. We're having flashbacks to how she grew up.
Legit.
Because remember, Jeanne grew up completely different from Bayonetta. She was a wanted child. She was royalty, and almost nobody could really fuck with her. So she starts seeing old friends, old teachers that she doesn't know, but she does know, dying left and right. And then she spots another wolf, much like Luca. And she just goes, "Did you do this?" And she just decides she's going to kill this. But again, depending on if you spare that wolf,
so that's going through
or
other
kill
stuff.
that wolf, different things happen. You kill the wolf, you get a wolf-based weapon.
All right, I totally missed where we're getting into this beat where Viola's going to die.
To the last 3 stages, you realize that Viola's been killed, and you realize that, oh shit, we sent her to find somebody who already knew what we were going to try to do, and he needed us where he needed us.
Okay, I get it. So in this version, Viola is flipped with Jeanne. Viola is doing what Jeanne was supposed to do, so she gets killed by Dr. Sigurd.
Rodin teleports in with Luca because both of them have figured it out. Because Luca has some weird ability where Luca's
so we've got Rodin
psychokinetically linked. We'll just call it psychokinetic.
That's okay. He's the lore guy. Luca is allowed to have lore-related privilege.
How to hop a dimension, whatever Luca's in the area, they inherit some traits from. They inherited Wolf Luca from an area where he was a magical person. He lived in a forest.
This is what happens in the game.
A werewolf. He stayed in the forest because he didn't want anyone to find out he had become, more than a man, because werewolves were hunted and where he's from. That Luca explains.
That's something we could have actually gone into if we're going to if we're gonna go to this other Luca who is a werewolf, we could talk about werewolf hunts, because werewolf hunts, witch hunts is a good correlative. You're actually giving some room for the characters to get up to the same level. That's one of the things that's very awkward about having Bayonetta and Luca enter into a theoretical relationship in the game, and part of why it feels really weird. The age stuff is super weird because Bayonetta is way freaking older than Luca, but also Luca has interacted with child Bayonetta at a formative point. So it's like double squicky that they do anything romantic. But if you are going to have them do something romantic, Luca should be some modicum of tough. So I'll give it that. But having the idea that Luca is part of a persecuted people and Bayonetta is also part of a persecuted people would create a good like dovetail. They don't do that because we don't get to talk about the Fae. We just don't talk about them. Bayo 3 Luca, half beasts, ours teleport. So Strider clearly has a lot of weird powers.
He's capable
he
of
can
fusing.
like
He learned how to do it when
cheat
he
his way.
killed
I'm
one
getting
of
a
his
phone call. Hold up. It's spam. We're gonna cut that out.
others. That Luca calls for any other Luca that'll listen to his voice, because you know Lucas kept saying they hear his voice. Rodin opens some interdimensional portal, and he just says, hopefully your dimension breaking and dimension shattering material will work with my demon magic or angelic magic, so we can make it
legit.
so anybody who
I mean,
hears this,
Rodin can
heaven,
have portals
hell,
to his
earth,
shop
or
all over the
purgatorio,
place. That's
paradiso,
clearly some
inferno, whatever version of
unexplained
Lucas
and
that can hear this
unexplored
will
part
come
of his
together
power
and help
set.
us out.
Might as well dig into it.
So now we get a super Luca, and
expand
instead
on
of
it.
fighting on a
Make
red
it better.
version
Make it
of
useful.
that giant witch Madama Butterfly, we have a super Luca Wolf, we have Jeanne, and we have Bayonetta and Rodin all fighting for the next 3 stages. The first stage is a literal stage. Dimensions are coming together and smashing apart. You basically have to keep fighting until you reach some, teleportation device that'll get you onto the moon or space, whatever. And you all...
So real quick, cutting in there, a location where dimensions are coming apart and smashing together and things like that would have been a much cooler place to fight the final boss than the weird ruined cityscape we get to. There are bits where the final boss like takes us into the mirror dimension, a la very Doctor Strange, and that was kind of cool. But there were other parts of the fight that are just in this like blank city ruin, which is such a weird downgrade for the final confrontation in a Platinum game. Like, we're fighting this guy in the cityscape as a kaiju, then up on the moon, then just in like a random pit of buildings. Random pit of buildings is straight the lamest final boss destination that I can recall in a Platinum game. Beautiful Joe is on a space station. We've got, I don't remember where the fight happens with the Matarasu in Okami. I think that was in like a big cave fighting Orochi for like the second time. The Wonderful 101, giant Death Star in space and through time. We've got Bayonetta 1 fighting in space. Bayonetta 2, I believe, were at like a mountaintop in the past, I think. I'm only vaguely recalling exactly where, but the cinematography of the final fight is incredible. Both the Baldur fight and the Opter fight are like mid-air spectaculars. I never played Nier Automata. I never played the Transformers game. Bummer. Hi-Fi Rush. Final boss fight for Hi-Fi Rush is at the top of this like lightning tower. There's this, like a sound system in the back just because kinda it's like a computer control, but it really felt like it's a sound system to me, just in the way of like the general vibe of the scene. But whatever, it's lame. In Bayo 3
But
it could have
when
been
you get
better.
there, the first thing that happens is Professor immediately realizes Rodin is a fucking threat. So he tries to take him out, but when he realizes that Rodin exists infinitely and he is only one, he realizes, okay, I have to try something different for you.
No, you can't
Separates
do
him
that
from
to the
group,
final boss.
And then he just literally throws him back onto the earth. Rodin
The final
basically
boss
says,
has to
"Don't
be
think I
tougher
won't
than
be
Rodin.
back."
Even if
he
Rodin
tries-
is a badass, the final boss has to be able to get him out of the scene.
Transform, he shoots his wings off. Rodin shoots a beam at him, which weakens him a little bit, while Jeanne is casting a spell to make sure they can breathe, on the moon, because it's the moon. So she's pretty much out of the
Yeah, that's
entire
true.
fight.
That's true.
So
Witches just
Bayonetta
breathe in space
and
when they need
Super
to
Wolf Luke.
throughout the whole
Penultimate
series.
stage. We go back to Viola, who's chilling with Enzo inside
You don't
Rodin's
gotta
bar.
breathe. It's
Rodin
not a big
teleported
deal.
himself, but he crashed so
Witches
hard
can breathe
he made a
underwater
giant
too
dust
in the
cloud.
series.
And he says,
No big
I
deal.
didn't want to have to do this, but we need all hands on deck. Then you see him slash himself, and he pour a little bit of blood into Viola's corpse. And then she opens her eyes, scene fades to black. We go back to Bayonetta and John. They're getting their asses beat. They are,
Okay,
like,
so doing more of an
legitimately loose, but this
explanation
time, it's a
for
little bit different.
Viola's
Professor gets bored with
transformation
them,
setup thing.
realizing, oh wait, you hoes have no way of getting off the moon.
So Viola's transformation in the game feels like it's an ass pull if you're just like casually watching through, but it is kind of foreshadowed in the first scene when the Bayonetta there dies and the constellation stuff like transfers into Viola. I think it's supposed to be implied that it's like the Arch-Eve power that's being transferred, and the reason why Luca has the transformation in the constellation theme is because he's the Arch-Atom. It's very odd. The transformation that Viola acquires, I think, feels like it's supposed to be a mix of the Strider Fae transformation and Bayonetta's Demon Masquerade, but it's not broken down in the scenes at all. It's not like Viola sits and has a conversation with somebody about it or even shows off the transformation to another character in any other scene. So much low-hanging fruit in terms of character interactions that could help us interpret the plot better.
Well,
so murky.
Enjoy each other's company for the next 500 years or until you run out of oxygen. Toodaloo. And he teleports away to go enact
How are
his
people
plan
breathing here?
where, he needed to. He wanted to basically get all energy from all dimensions into that one point. He's interrupted. Rodin teleports back up there. They don't know how much time has passed. And Viola's there with them. Viola says, I'm helping out. They're like, how are you alive? Rodin explains the situation, and she got her new
You need to
devil
be
trick fairy
careful
form thingy
with the power
we need to do
and
different
presence
things to
of
try to
characters
stop
who
him.
are
And then they notice
able
all
to
of a sudden
teleport.
that the energy that was coming
Because if they
towards
can
the planet
teleport
stopped.
willy-nilly,
They don't know
you
what
feel like
stopped
you're
them.
robbing the story
But
anytime they
figured
don't
this
show
may
up.
be the best time to strike. It's Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2 dimension characters temporarily stalling him, which is why he can't concentrate all the energy. But he's annoyed that he can't seem to hurt them, and they do more damage than every other Bayonetta he's come across. And they explain to him, well, we know who you are and what you are. We met a child named Viola who was jumping through time, not dimensions, and told us what you're trying to do. And because
That's
we
legit.
met her, we went together and we decided we were going to get things that could potentially stop. However,
The
all of that
introduction
material
of
was essentially
Bayonetta 1
an inferno,
Bayonetta and
it took a
Bayonetta...
great sacrifice.
The introduction of both of the alt Bayonettas 1 and 2 in the game was something I was really looking for throughout the game, because the Bayonetta we actually play as just feels like a punk. You can tell that she's not the original. And I think it was very hype when they first showed up, but considering that even the three of them together don't get the final blow on Singularity, they feel really underutilized, which is very strange. Having them come in as each kind of off to the side or solo actors to stall Singularity would be pretty great, but I think they still should show up in a somewhat heroic or surprising fashion, because you can't burn that. That is one of the big moments in the game that is due to the audience, is the arrival of those characters initially. So maybe you have a circumstance where Viola's stalling Singularity, doing something cool, since when Viola shows up in 3, she just gets punked. You could have her actually be fighting Singularity for a while, go through like one phase, then we do a cutaway, we have a bit, Singularity's got her on the ropes, and the other two Bayonettas show up before your prime Bayonetta shows up to be the final hero.
Of a lot of demons, including the ruler of Inferno, to get these two particular weapons that they both have. Because they went and got, the King of Inferno weapon, the Queen of Inferno weapon from their dimensions.
That's
and,
an option.
Make them weapons.
I know why they went with
can
the
look like whatever
pistols
the fuck you
for
feel
each
about.
of the alt
Eventually,
Bayonettas
the whole
appearing,
squad
because
gets down there.
they are
And
the
then
iconic kind of
both the
cutscene
Bayonettas
weapons and
recognize
trailer
Rodin and
weapons
say,
for those
"Oh, hey,
characters.
Rodin. Like, how do you know Rodin? How do you know
They wanted to go with
Rodin?"
what was optimally
And then
recognizable
John's like,
for every
one day
Bayonetta.
you're gonna have to explain to us what exactly you are. They all start fighting. The Bayonettas realize they can sync up. Rodin gets an idea. He calls for the
So we're
John
still using that
who
beat.
was
That's a good
fighting
one.
in the other Bayonetta's dimension. He can do this because once he has been someplace before, dimensional wise, he can immediately go back there. He just looked for their Umbran energy and went to find them. So he's going for the first part of the fight or the first.
That would
HP
be a
bar.
bit of an upgrade to
Comes back with
Rodin.
them,
You
tells
could
him, "Hey,
explain
you
that
Jeanne,
in the middle of the
do that
game,
whole
but
fusion
Rodin
thing."
should not begin
So
the
now
game
we got
plotline with that
sextuple
power.
witches, and you know,
Or pull it out of
Professor's
nowhere.
legitimately losing, but he starts using time manipulation. Now that's when Rodin comes in, because Rodin is immune to the ravages and effects of time manipulation. He's immune to any form of time manipulation as long as
That's
it's not magic.
probably fair
So
if
that
you
way
wanted
we
to
have a
give that
canonical
ability to
reason why he
Rodin.
still gets hurt by time manipulation involved.
Zax would like to give
he starts beating the
everything
fuck
to
out of him, so
Rodin.
he can't do that no more. So that gives the Bayonettas time to summon out the ultimate Shin demons. They're basically trying to make a Shin version of Shiba from the first game.
Taken that he's using Shin in the same way that it's used in the... I can't remember if it gets used in one of the later Gurren Lagann forms. I think in Gurren Lagann, the greatest form is the Tengen Toppa. But Shin, as it's used in Zatch Bell, would apply to this, where the ultimate version of each spell they have is the Shin version of that spell.
If you remember her during the final sequence. Now, this one does a
Very
little bit different.
missing
It compresses
in
itself
Bayonetta
down
3.
to where it's the size of an actual human, a 6'2" woman, and it actually just starts fighting the professor along with Rodin.
That's a good trope, and they could absolutely pull that trope into here. The notion that like the power of something and the size of something scale together up until a certain break point. There's a point where like get bigger, get bigger, get bigger, get bigger, and then somehow it becomes way more terrifying when the dude that was 6 stories tall, his next form is like rinky-dink small. He goes back down to regular person size, and you know the regular person is way tougher or at least as strong as the big model, but is actually fast. This trope is everywhere. You think about Frieza's forms. Frieza's first form, not that big. Second form, bigger. Third form is like the Alien Queen version. Fourth form, the perfect form, is back to his regular size, and he is way stronger. And that just keeps happening out, like throughout all sorts of stuff. You, I think the one of the big villains in One Punch Man, the first alien guy that takes more than one punch, he has like built up forms, built up forms, built up forms, and then it pulls back to something that is more mystical, but his original size. I think they did the same thing with Garo in the One Punch manga, but I'm not fully caught up with that. There are like gaps in what's translated. Awesome trope. Go for it. Use it. Take a Queen Sheba that scales back down to regular size, but condenses all the power.
Transformed into his new double trigger state.
Have her dance
Viola's
with
jumping
Bayonetta.
in, and it's just one giant
And then do
cutscene
the
at that
attack.
point. But Professor had one final trick up his sleeve.
Something
He
that's actually
expels all the
climactic
energy
instead of
all
like,
the other
summon
professors
Gamora again.
who
Gamora will
think
kill
like
him.
And they materialize. They
So
look like
frustrating.
duplicates, but with slight alterations. And
Okay.
they each individually fight all of the characters. One for Viola, one for Wolf Luca, one for Rodin, one for Triple John, one for Triple Netta. And
That's
they all
legit.
win. But they realize as long as one remains or has enough time to heal, they can.
Because that's absolutely in Singularity's power set. He fights by summoning stands the whole time. And if you're going to have, 6 characters make it to the final showdown, make them relevant. Make them actually have something to fight. We could have a fight where for every phase, for every health bar, we're switching off between all the gals. Maybe we have the fights simultaneously, and he can do an ability like snap his fingers to switch who you're playing as and switch which form of his is fighting you until you're able to beat all the health bars at once. That would be sick.
Respawn infinitely. So they have to figure out what to do with this thing once they, kill it for the umpteenth time. And that's when we get the one thing that we wanted. Actual plot development and character development. So the Bayonetta split up, and 2 of them are deciding to sacrifice themselves to boost up one Bayonetta in a different way. Instead of boosting up the magical power, they're boosting up their ability to perform physically and attack stupid hard. So they're making one Bayonetta instead
Well,
of
that's
having
kind of what the
enhanced
combination
magical
does.
power and enhanced
Yeah.
summoning power. They're giving her enhanced physical power. Basically doing the invert. Instead of giving demons more power, she's getting more power from witches as blood sacrifice. It's a forbidden technique that witches are only supposed to do in the event that they are under an extreme crisis and they need at least one person to survive in a group where no one can. And
So
they
this
let
is the thing
themselves
that
die.
they,
But when they do that, Daddy shows up.
kind of
yes,
blow
good
and
old
spoil.
Crispin Freeman Daddy shows up. Bolter shows up because he couldn't find out what was causing any of the stuff that was going on. He was fighting his own war.
As said, Balder's missing, but if you're going to pull the trigger on Balder, you need to pull that before you bring in the other two Bayonettas. Your best reveal, your coolest reveal in the plot is the other two alt Bayonettas. So if Balder's going to show up, he needs to be here before this point, and he needs to do some other stuff. I think you are 100% licensed to ice Balder, ice Rosa, before you get to the final chapter of the game. If you want to actually put some stakes on what Singularity is doing, which mostly they don't, it is a good idea to have him kill one or two important characters. Just like Yopter back in Bayonetta 2 is the one who killed Rosa. You can give that to us through Singularity killing Balder. Although they try to give that to us through Singularity killing Jeanne, but everybody's killed Jeanne. As if killing Jeanne impresses us.
But
sad
he
but
heard
true.
from the angels in Paradiso, hey, there's two versions of your daughter who came from the same dimension who are ascending the
Coming in with a
Paradiso
flock
instead
of
going to
angels
hell.
at the end of
They
the
make
game
contract,
would have
they go to
actually been
hell.
rad.
But these Bayonettas contract are in a different dimension. So we'll use that as our little loophole. He comes down, has no idea what's going on.
There should
They
actually be
basically
a
explain,
dimension
look,
where
this is your
Bayonetta's
kid from
Illumin
the
Sage,
future,
a dimension
because
where
he doesn't
Bayonetta
understand
summons
why the,
angels.
Cerezas he saw look like grown
It's free
adults.
real estate.
This guy's causing every single problem. You need to help us fight. So he essentially calls out every single summon he has. He can't move, and everyone just beats him into a bloody
What's
ass
playing
fight.
on the screen now?
But
This is the attack that
Rodin
should have killed Singularity.
decides to trap him in an interdimensional space because they acknowledged that they couldn't kill him. He wasn't stronger than them at the end because they kept weakening him, but they acknowledged that they couldn't kill Professor. So they decided to keep him in a micro dimension that is nothing but blackness and darkness, a space in between dimensions.
That's
until
pretty
they can figure out
consistent.
what to do
That
with it. But
suggestion,
Viola
like
goes
one
in
with
there
reality,
because she knows
because
something the
it
rest of us
appears
don't,
as though
and they
his
don't know what
power
they did.
set and the
But problem
homunculi
now is, since
are
Rodin
based
sealed
on
him, no
like
one
the
else can
cycle
follow.
of reincarnation.
Viola goes in because Viola knows that
So you could say you
as
cannot
long as
kill him
this guy has one of the
necessarily,
interdimensional travel
but you can
devices,
force him to
he can figure out way, or
a
potentially
stage
figure out
of
a way to get out.
reincarnation that does
Because
not
there's
allow
difference
him to
between
conduct his evil
trying
plans.
to engineer technology from scratch and trying to engineer technology because you physically have it with you at the time and you might be able to figure something out. So essentially, she's not even trying to kill him. She's trying to destroy the device, and even if she can't, she'd rather die trying.
So nice, we're playing
So
it
Viola
twice.
does essentially become a hero. When she gets out, all the dimensions start repairing themselves. So none of the Bayonettas, none of the Lucas, none of the Rodins and Lopter, they don't know if she survives when she goes back or if she has
That
time
was
to go to
something
the
that was
hospital.
unclear to me,
Someone can help her
is
heal, because when everyone
after
goes
Singularity's
back, they don't
gone,
go back
does all the stuff
where
like
they
repair
essentially were teleported from.
when he's
They go
gone?
back in the
We
dimensional
cut
equivalent
over
of the
to
space
an
they're at. So
okay
she
New
could have
York
ended up in the
afterwards,
desert. She could have
and I
ended up
don't
in
know if that's
Paradiso,
because his
Purgatorio.
actions were
She could have ended
reversed,
up in the,
or
you
if
know,
that's
the New York
because
Bay.
they just jumped to another universe.
And Bayonetta does not fall in love with Luca magically. And then, right after the credits roll, instead of a fucking pointless pole dance, John and Bayonetta sit down at Rodin's bar with Luca with a big giant book. And he moves his hand and says, "The Book of Rodin." And they ask,
All right,
Rodin,
Zax.
"What are you?" And then, right before he tells us, fade to black.
Pulling
That's
super
how I
hard
would
from
fix this.
Rodin.
You know,
Okay, so I'm gonna cut it there. The one other thing I have to note about that I think is actually this is the biggest joke, but I think it's really legit. You can say that across all of the dimensions that there's only one Viola. So Viola is the exception across all the dimensions because that's how unlikely it is that Luca and Bayonetta would ever get together and Bayonetta would have a kid. So you just say the reason there's one Viola and why she is an exception in so many ways, and you give her privilege within the story, is because the union of Bayonetta and Luca is that unlikely. But when you cut back over to the main reality, those characters should actually, treat it like it's unlikely. You should have a bit where it's being revealed that Viola is Bayonetta's daughter, and Bayonetta should be, ew, weird. Why would I ever do that? And then you play off of that and go through this whole thing. And over the course of the game, you have Bayonetta warming up to her. But you don't try to treat it like it's this half-baked secret that everybody in the audience already knows is absolute truth. Biggest problem with the game. I can tell Zach's biggest problem with Bayonetta 3 is not enough Rodin, and I'll give him that. There was not enough Rodin in that game, not enough Jeanne in that game. But mostly, the characters just don't spend enough time talking to each other. There's a throwaway line that Jeanne is Viola's teacher, but they don't spend time together in the game. They don't reminisce on things. There are no further lessons that Viola learns because she doesn't spend more time with Jeanne. She doesn't spend more time with Bayonetta. If she's going to be the successor for the franchise, she needs to spend time with every single character thus far and have a good scene with them. She needs a scene with Rodin too, with Jeanne, with Bayonetta, with Luca, for her to develop a relationship with all of those characters that gives us, the player, the trust that, those relationships are a valid part of the franchise and are going to continue on. And we're just missing that. So, on the whole, a number of pretty good, valuable suggestions. Changing up the final boss fight so that it is more valid to have more characters there. Trying to integrate Baldur and Rodin into the story. They're very cool characters. Dropping them is nonsensical. Integrating Jeanne into the story in a much bigger role. Good idea. What I don't like about the suggestions, shoehorning Viola a little bit. They're clearly trying to develop Viola. It's better to polish up the character instead of pushing her to the side. I like the idea of maybe giving Viola some other weapons to play with because I think her moveset is very stale, and a lot of the parts of her kit don't feel like they're well suited to the enemies you're up against. Especially the parry feels very janky, and it's not that it feels janky in a vacuum. It feels janky when you have to put it up against certain enemy patterns that are designed to be dodged through, not designed to be blocked from a standing position. So, But hey, fixing Bayonetta 3 is a Herculean task. I sat down for a morning to think about writing a script or all the things I would try to fix, and it's insane. It's baffling. So Zax has gone out of his way to give very specific prescriptions and a very particular way of flowing through the story. I don't usually think of things in terms of particulars. I think of more of generalities of like this general vibe had to happen without thinking through the exact scene. So I appreciate a detailed take. It was a fun watch. So thank you all for tuning in. And make sure to tune into more of TokenCast. I'd also love to see you on my channel. Lately, I'm running through streams for a few more puzzle games. It's not having much of a flow through to YouTube, but I'd also just be glad to see you on Twitch. So this has been Jupiter Exile. I hope we wander again soon. Good night.